You are listening to the Hostage to the Devil podcast. Some listeners may find this content disturbing.
So on the show tonight is Nathan Hughes, and our paths sort of crossed recently, and we appear to have a lot of mutual friends. And when you told me the story about Lorraine Warren coming over to Northern Ireland, I was like, right, I have to get you on the show. It's a fascinating story. So first and foremost, thanks for coming on and giving me your time, Nathan.
Thank you for having me, Marty, and I agree, and it's great to touch base with you because we do have a lot in common, and it's a great story. It's an interesting story. It's a story that a lot of people don't really know about. The fact that Lorraine Warren has investigated hundreds, maybe thousands of hauntings across the world, but there's one in little old Belfast that has a very interesting and murky background to it, so I'm excited to tell you about it.
So let's go back to sort of the origins of before Lorraine Warren's involvement. Talk me through where you were and what you were encountering at the time.
Well, I mean, I could go back to when my parents originally purchased the property. It was our family home. The house itself was built in 1896. It's quite a large, detached Victorian manor house. I suppose it wouldn't be a manor house. It was a large home basically in a Victorian area of Belfast that was quite salubrious in its era. But my parents purchased it in 1979 and moved in 1980, and they purchased it off the World Evangelical Crusade because they got an absolute bargain on it, and it was the best house they could get for the money. And where it was located at the time, well, was the Murder Mile, it was known as. A lot of atrocities that happened in and around within a mile of the property. And a lot of people just didn't want to buy properties in North Belfast at that time. You know, it was the victim of the Troubles. It was the victim of bombings in the Belfast Blitz in 1941. And a lot of the very wealthy people were moving out, and they got their hands on this amazing house. So they spent a lot of time renovating it, and they never really noticed too much strange activity going on until much later on. But one thing I remember saying to my dad today, did you notice anything strange about the house? And he said one of the things was that the pets in the house always found the attic room quite strange. They would take panic attacks, they would soil themselves, they would run out of the room. And shortly after my parents purchased the house, they were doing work on the roof, and our family dog walked up there, freaked out, and jumped out a skylight window and fell right through the outhouse building. Now, the dog survived, but that was one of the first weird things that happened. Like, animals just did not like the upper floor of the house, which was a bit odd. So the other thing was my parents were dealing with the grief of losing their baby daughter. And so they didn't really have time to think about odd things or strange things happening in the house. They did this big, huge house to look after. And yeah, that was that. They just were moving on with life, and the Troubles was happening all around them. So they didn't really have time to think of the paranormal. And it wasn't really a hot topic at the time either. So then myself and my twin brother came along, and I suppose I only really started noticing strange things happening in the house when we were in our teenage years, like mid-teenage years. And it started off with things like you would hear noises and you could explain things like that. Then taps would turn on their own, glasses began to smash on their own, things would move in front of you. And that sort of progressed from there. I remember distinctively smelling this tobacco on one of the landings in the house, and I thought, where did that come from? Because no one in our household smoked, and it was like a strange smell. It wasn't cigarettes. It was like old tobacco smoke, like a pipe. And I remember bringing my mum up to the landing to say, "Can you smell this?" And she could smell it too, and it was only in a certain little corner of the landing. And then there would be other times where you would smell what I would describe as like, you know, when you strike a match and then it has that after smell, like of burning. You could smell that around this particular landing in the house, which again was quite odd. So things began to progress from there. And what I think really kicked it off was I had a Ouija board made for a film studies project when I was about the age of 15. And we were going to use this as a prop in the film. So I did a bit of acting, still do a bit of acting, and I got cast in this film in Scotland. And I remember going away and leaving this Ouija board in my mum's bedroom because for whatever reason, I knew it was a bit creepy and I didn't want to really use it. I just had it there as a prop. But I rang home from Scotland when I was filming, and my mum said to me, all these strange things have been happening in the house. So it seems like this Ouija board did something. It maybe triggered something or woke something in the house. That particular night, my mum was in her room and she'd moved the Ouija board out of the room because she was having new carpet put down the next day. So the only thing that was in the room was her bed, really. Um, all the furniture had been removed, and she'd put down bank statements at the end of her bed that she wanted to go through. Um, and upon returning to the room, she noticed that the bank statements had disappeared, they'd been moved, and on her bed was a black bin bag that she didn't put there. So it's really weird and irrational. Like, she just couldn't understand. She thought someone was playing a joke on her, but there was no one else in the house. And so basically, later on that night, she was going through a magazine, and inside the magazine, her bank statements had been placed. So it was just strange things like that, like that she couldn't really explain. Like, why would someone do that? You know, there's no real reason for that. It's not even funny. It's not even really scary. It's just weird. So that was sort of the start of it. And then my mum woke up one night to hear someone howling, and she thought it was coming from outside in the street. So she opened up her window to look out in case someone was hurt, and saw this spectre staring in at her from the bedroom window. And she completely freaked out, screamed, fell back into her bed, and was, I think, trying to convince herself that it wasn't real. So she didn't want to scare us. Um, and on that, I think it was the night after, I think it was around Christmas time, because I remember the Christmas tree was up. She decided that she would tell us what had happened. But the night, let me see, what night was it? It was either the same night or the night after. I can't really remember because we were quite young at the time. But my brother and I woke up. We used to sleep in the attic room, the twins, ourselves, and we heard this sound again ourselves, like as if someone was hurt or moaning. And it was like quite loud and it's quite scary. So the lights were out in the room and we were really quite petrified because it was getting louder and louder and louder. And then it sounded like it was almost on the skylight of the house, like above our beds. So we both kind of pretended that we were asleep because we were so terrified. And eventually one of us was brave enough to reach out and turn on the light, and the sound just stopped. It was really quite bizarre. And that was really when it all started to kick off.
And was it a male howling or is it a female? The sounds that you were hearing.
To me, it was kind of nondescript. I mean, it was like any experience that we've had in the house, we hear a sound or you see something. You can't really tell if it's male or female. It's very like androgynous, which is odd, you know. So there was another night when I was alone in the attic room, and our pet dog, who actually he was a stray dog and he had a broken leg, but it had set, and but every night he would hobble up to sleep beside me in the attic bedroom. So there was a sofa bed at the end of the bed and he would sleep there. But he would sometimes stare into the far corner of the room and growl. And it was almost like he was coming up to protect you, and you felt safe with the dog there too.
Yeah.
But this particular night, the dog wouldn't come up the stairs, and I was getting quite scared because of it. So I carried him up and put him on the sofa bed and told him to stay, but he kept growling into this like dark corner of the room. And then he just ran out of the room. So I thought, well, look, I'm just going to have to go to sleep here. My brother was, I don't know where he was. he wasn't there that night. He maybe was working or something like that in the local pub. And yeah, the next thing I began to hear this breathing sound, and it started to get louder and louder, and then it began to like bellow throughout the room, like almost like the sound of someone exhaling. And again, I couldn't really tell if it was a man or a woman, but if I had to say, maybe that particular sound was more masculine, but it felt very ominous, and it was there. It was trying to let me know that it was there. So again, I turned on all the lights, couldn't sleep, turned on the TV, and it did eventually go away. I remember telling my family, and no one believed me.
Yeah,
Um,
I had a similar encounter with my dog at the time. During the middle of Hostage to the Devil, I mean, it was a 6 year process for me. But when I would always within, oh, I wasn't 6 years full time by all means, but it was anytime I sort of had like bursts of motivation and bursts of work on the project, I would hear and experience a lot of activity in the house. For example, it's funny because it always used to take me off guard. So when I was locking up at the house at night, I would hear like a little. I would say it was a girl. A little girl's would run across the landing. I'd hear that noise, but it would always catch me off guard every single time. And there was one powerful experience where I was in the living room late at night doing some research, and my dog, Labrador dog at the time, Tom, big sort of blonde Labrador, he, like you witnessed, something came into the room, and I couldn't see what it was, but it was definitely something entered the room, and he was transfixed on this entity and growled, and then moved over to me and pinned me on, basically came on top and pinned me to the sofa, as in like a protective stance, like he would do with his own children, etc. So it was a very and he watched this thing drift across the room, but it was incredible how his first instinct was to protect me. It was very, very powerful. And so I 100% believe animals can see.
yeah, definitely animals can sense something. I mean, for some weird reason, all of our family pets also dig up the same point in the garden.
Right.
And we're almost too scared to dig it up and find out what's underneath. We had building work done recently, and we
Are,
could have dug up
are
that
your parents
area.
still there? Are your parents still there?
Yeah, we still own the
All
home.
right.
My dad lives in Dublin, and my mum lives in the original family home. I actually built a house in the grounds of the home, so
Oh
I
wow.
this is a new build, that I'm in now. But that particular night with the dog growling and hearing the breathing, no one believed me until it happened to them.
Yeah.
So other members of the family then began to experience it. My brother experienced it in the attic, and then I had another experience where I got up to go to the bathroom one night, and it's a big old house, but it only has this one little tiny Victorian water closet toilet. So I got up in the middle of the night, went down to the bathroom, came back up, and I remember looking from the landing into the attic and seeing this, what looked like a person, really, but it was more like the outline of a person. I couldn't see a face or any features or any eyes, and it was just like a shadow that had been peeled off the wall and was floating. It had
Yeah.
no legs, it had a torso, and I sort of thought, am I seeing things? It was really frightening. But whatever way my fight or flight response worked, I thought I better run towards it to sort of prove or scare it away or prove that it's not there. And as I ran towards it, it disappeared.
Yeah.
That was really quite freaky. And I told my brother about it again, woke him up. He didn't believe me again until the same thing happened to him. He was in the room one night alone, and the thing appeared to him as well. So what was interesting about that was in the particular location where that silhouette appeared and appeared again. That was the one location in the house when Lorraine Warren visited on her investigation. She said this is the most haunted location in the house. Bear in mind, she'd never been in the property before. Um, and I thought that was quite interesting that she knew that about the property, and that she was picking up on the senses and the experiences that we had had. So I think that her psychic abilities certainly were on point in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
particular area in the house, you know.
It was in my research making the film, a lot of people who talked about the rite of exorcism, for example, being in that room with the person and the team. They talk about how it's more of a feeling. It's not necessarily things are happening and manifestations are happening, but it's more of a feeling. And when people have sort of paranormal encounters, they doesn't matter how well descriptive you are of what you encountered, that other person's not really going to believe you, or they might believe you, but they won't
Yeah.
understand until they have their own experience. And it's about experience. It's about having your own personal, subjective experience. So this is where, with paranormal shows that I've found in the past, is that they're trying so hard to throw this to prove the existence of like some ghosts and demons and entities, for example, that they do too much in that sense. They're forcing something which you just have to be there on the ground in that location and experience it for yourself. You're not going to get the same experience through the screen, for example. So
Yeah, I don't think you're going to believe it. And I'm the first to say that, you know, whilst I'm open-minded and I believe, I'm also a skeptic. I don't believe everything that everyone tells me. Um, and I think you have to be there to experience it yourself to know that there's no other possible explanation.
absolutely, that's it's if you want to collaborate, I'll happily come over and get some ground penetration radar systems, and we'll see what's in that garden of yours and see if there's anything buried underneath.
It could be something as simple as maybe an old family pet or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
But the very fact that my family have owned the house from 1979,
Yeah.
um, I just don't know what would still be there that could still be sensed. You know, even if it was pet remains, I don't know
Yeah.
what the hell the dogs are doing digging up that spot. In fact, I put up something on my Instagram. Um, in that particular spot, one night the dogs had been digging in that day, and we put the barbecue over it to stop them from digging it. But that night, the security cameras were going off in the garden, and it recorded this. It's a very faint face or head-like shape that appears above the barbecue, um, which was a little bit weird. You know, I don't know. Again, it makes me a little bit creeped out to unlock what's beneath it. So sometimes what you don't know is better
Yeah.
than what you do.
It's partly myth that you parked a barbecue above its burial ground or something. Or
Exactly.
I know we mentioned Lorraine Warren there in the story. Let's sort of go to the moment you asked for help, in the sense that obviously the activity was intensifying. People were starting to believe you more because they've had their own experiences. So tell the audience why Lorraine Warren, and how did you even get in touch with her? I mean, she was very, very well known, and obviously was this pre the Conjuring film, the first one, or was it post?
Well, this was pre the Conjuring film, so like we first got in touch with Lorraine Warren. I think it was around 2003 when Ed was still alive. He was quite sick at the time, so Lorraine wasn't actually able to come over to Ireland at that stage. But she was speaking with us over the phone. What had happened was the hauntings or the incidents began to escalate. It started around 2001 and it began to escalate and it was going on for a few years and it was getting quite frightening. And I was actually in my father's house in the south in Dublin and I saw a documentary about Lorraine Warren and I had no idea who she was. Um, However, I went onto their website and just sent them an email just asking for advice about what we should do. Um, and quite interestingly, like they did respond fairly quickly within a day or so and said, look, Lorraine would be interested in speaking to you over the phone. So I did, and her advice was that she said that, look, is there any what did she say? Is there any occult items in the house? And I said, well, actually, yes. We had a Ouija board made. We don't use it. It's never been used, but it's in the house. And she said it doesn't matter. She says those particular items can attract spirits or awaken something. and she says it could even be pretending to be a human spirit. So she said her advice was to actually bury the Ouija board with a crucifix, and to get her out of the house, that would be the first step. And she said at her end, she would engage with the church and pray for us, and to see how it went from there. So my twin brother and I went, there's like a small forest near where we live, and we took the Ouija board and got rid of it in the forest. Um, Strangely enough, one of my brother's friends said to him, actually, I would like to have that Ouija board. And I didn't want to give it to him because of the bad luck that it had brought to us. And I said to my brother, look, if you want to give it to him, you go and get it. I'm not going anywhere near it. It's terrifying. But my brother went back up to get it, and it had gone. It was someone else had found it or taken it, and God knows where it is now. But um, that was quite strange that someone had taken it. I don't know why you'd want to take it or dig it up out of the ground, but someone must have seen it.
where would you even start by making a Ouija board? Did you just type in Google, like, how do you make a Ouija board? Or, how did you get in? I know it's for a film prop, but I mean, how do you even, did you just do your own research and design it yourself?
Well, it was made by a friend of mine who was a carpenter. It seems like bad luck followed it,
Yeah.
you know, and I just didn't want it anywhere near the house. But once the Ouija board was removed, Lorraine actually did stay in touch with us. We would have emailed or telephoned, and back in those days it was long distance phone calls, so they were expensive.
Yeah.
She did also recommend that we get a priest out to bless the house. And when we were younger, a priest had come out to bless the house from the parish, and we didn't really know why he was there. I think it was following the incident where my mum saw that thing at the bedroom window. But we got another priest out to bless the house again, and I don't think it really made any difference. We were still experiencing things like it sounded like someone was running up the stairs, or what else would happen? Yeah, there were so many incidents that happened. Like my brother was holding a glass in his hand one night, and the glass just exploded. Um, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of other things. The howling, the breathing, the apparitions. It was really quite weird. There's so many experiences that happened. My younger brother heard thudding in the attic one night when he was in the house on his own, and he went up to see what was going on. Bearing in mind it's a detached house, we don't have neighbours. And he said he walked up and it sounded like someone had collapsed on the floor in front of him, but he couldn't see anything. And it absolutely terrified him. So he just ran out of the house. So that it wasn't calming down. So by about 2009, yeah, I think it was 2009, we were back in touch with Lorraine. Ed Warren had actually passed away at this stage, and we were speaking to her on the phone, and she agreed to come over from America to do a proper investigation. So she came over for about 4 days, I think. Um, and she came with Tony Spera, her son-in-law, who is still alive and is
Yep.
married to her daughter, Judy. I
Yep.
think you've met him.
Yeah. He's been on the podcast. Yeah.
Oh, has he? Right, I must listen to that
Yeah.
episode. So they came and they did an investigation. There was actually a reporter here as well documenting what was happening. Um, and Lorraine's conclusions basically were from the investigation that there was two human spirits in the house. But she said that one of the human spirits was quite a horrible person in their lifetime, and he'd done some very atrocious things which would have put him in league with the demonic. And she says his hatred has carried on, and he's not happy about you being in the property. She said that the other spirit was a female spirit, and she was like an older lady who had died in the property, and she was very protective of us and loved us, and loved all the joy. And so she said it was quite strange because there was two spirits in the house that were haunting us, but in two very different ways.
Yeah.
And that certainly was what it felt like living there, because we have lots of great memories in the house.
Yeah.
The house has a very protective energy in it. in some rooms, particularly in the front left-hand living room. There's a very lovely positive vibe in there, and sometimes the door will just open up and my mum says, "Oh, that's Miss Bigger coming in." And and then there's other rooms in the house that have this really oppressive energy. So it would be interesting to see if you could find anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I am not a paranormal investigator. I've just like accidentally stumbled into this world, which I'm a spiritual person. So yeah, it'd be fascinating to come and have a look around. Obviously, if your mum's happy with that, we'll come over. We did the Sharon Rectory in Donegal last year, 2 years ago, actually. So yeah, we're open to come, the team and I, to come over and have a little look around. I'm particularly interested in the garden spot. I would like to, yeah. Yeah. My gut's telling me to go straight to that garden spot. Hopefully there's no barbecue on top of it, but yeah.
I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem. My other brother lives in the house as well. I mean,
All right, great.
So yeah, I mean, there's no problem. It would be good to have a look. I don't know if I'd want to conjure anything up and start things again because it has
No.
been quite quiet.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want any Ouija boards or seances or things like that. So we try to avoid things like that now because of what happened in the past. But strangely, more recently, it's been very quiet. I think whatever Lorraine did must have worked in some way to cleanse the house, but it didn't mean that everything just stopped. There was the odd thing here and there. And in fact, there's a funny thing that happened about the year Lorraine came. I think she was there in November. And by December, I got this DVD and there was a documentary on it about Lorraine Warren because I was fascinated by the whole thing. And it was Christmas Day, and my brothers and I were watching this documentary about Lorraine. Well, she featured in it. And the first time that she appeared on the screen, the DVD player stopped and the tray came out. And I thought my brothers were having a joke or someone had the remote control, but actually it was sitting right on the coffee table. So I thought, that is so strange. Whatever is in this house really did not like Lorraine Warren.
Yeah. Just obviously, I'm here to ask the questions that the audience will want to ask. Getting Lorraine Warren over, then obviously she arrived with Tony. I mean, does she charge a fee? Do you pay for her travel, accommodation? How does it work? From like, if Joe Bloggs was to get somebody like Lorraine Warren?
Yeah, I think that she was more inclined to do it because she was familiar with us and she knew about the situation. And when we reached out to her again, we thought, well, yes, she didn't charge a set fee, but she said she'd need some expenses covered. So like, what we did was we hosted a lecture, one of their famous lectures in the Hilton Hotel, and charged people in to hear, her evidence. And Tony and her both presented it and gave anecdotal experience and also photographic evidence and things that they've captured over the years. It was really fascinating. And Lorraine also demonstrated some of her clairvoyant experiences or clairvoyant abilities, which was really amazing. And she had members of the audience in tears. She also met with a local family, I'll not say their name, but on a missing persons case and gave them some information. So it was a really fascinating experience, but that particular lecture helped fund their expenses and their accommodation while they were here. And Lorraine was amazing.
It's good to know, yeah. It's good to know because a lot of critics of the Warrens and their line of work will just see them as absolute fraudsters and charging money and making a lot of money from people who need the help. So it's nice to hear from the horse's mouth that, when you were in trouble, she came over and, all she asked for was expenses, and he did a very clever way of recouping that money and getting that money for her. So no, it's just good information to tell the audience of Lorraine Warren and how she was as a person. And let's go back to Lorraine Warren. So she arrives at the house. What's she like? What is the first thing she wants to do?
So the funny thing was Lorraine is, as they depict her in the film, she's dressed in tartan and, she has her hair up and even for her age, she was quite glamorous. I would say that she was becoming a little bit forgetful at that stage. But she was full of energy. And the first thing she did, was we brought her into the dining room and she met with a reporter and a team of people. There was people that wanted to interview her. So we allowed that to happen. And we did want to have the experience documented in case anything happened, for proof. So she didn't bring any scientific equipment. I think when Ed was alive, he was the more science-based side of it, and she was the more clairvoyant side of it. So her experience was more about feeling the space, providing visions of what she could see in the house, what she could see has happened there before. And she walked around every room. She also provided like blessings, and we said prayers. And um, at one stage, she said, "Oh, sweet Holy Father," and it really scared the reporter. But what she was referring to was a picture of the Pope. uh, so I thought that was quite funny. Um, but yeah, she walked around rooms, and initially I was a bit skeptical, thinking, well, anyone could say this, anyone could make this up. But it was when she reached the attic room and pointed out the location where my brother and I had seen this particular entity, and she pointed to it and she says, "I'm finding it really oppressive here. It's hard to breathe." And she said that this is where he is. This is the most haunted location in your house. And I was like, well, I would agree. So I found that really interesting. She also picked up an energy at my mother's bedroom window, which again was where she'd seen a spectre. Um, the back living room, she was able to pick up like energy in there as well. And then other rooms, she said that these rooms are completely fine. There's no issue. And again, we would agree with her on those. So again, her vibes were picking up on the vibes that we had. So that was sort of affirming for us. Um, but yeah, I think had Ed not been so ill originally, they may have come over earlier and done more of a scientific investigation, using equipment. But the particular night that she was there, nothing happened, other than what she was reporting back on psychic vibes and things like that. Had she been there longer, maybe something would happen. But that's quite typical in a haunted house. You could go for a year and nothing could happen, or you could have a week where you have something happening quite regularly. So it's not unusual for something like that to happen. If something was happening every single day, every day of the year, you'd literally just move out. You wouldn't be able to tolerate it.
For me, it just happens. Like encounters always happen. Like all 100% of the time, it always takes me off guard. Like it surprises me when I'm, even when I'm like actively like I'm not sorting out experiences, but it always catches me off guard every single time. And I always say to myself, touche, man, touche. It's caught me again. It's caught me off guard again because it doesn't work that way. It's too easy. If you're there with your scientific equipment and you're ready and you're charged and you're recording, it's too easy to for something to reveal itself, especially if it's
exactly. It never happens when you're waiting for it or when you're expecting it. It's always when you least expect it, and that is what makes it that little bit more frightening.
I do like the light and dark element of the house, though. I do like the fact that the house, in a sense, is a vessel for two types of spirits: a dark entity and a very light, protective energy. And I do love that. That just sort of that just depicts sort of the spiritual battle we're in every single day. You know what I mean? So, talk us through the wrap up, then the debrief at the end of her experience at your mum's house.
So I do remember that night. It had a very somber atmosphere about it, and there was a little bit of religion brought into it because Lorraine herself was very religious. She was also Catholic, and she had Irish descent, so she had this real connection to our family. She really bonded with us. And I think too that because she'd lost her husband and my mum was a single mum and she just really wanted to help us in some way. And it came across as very genuine, you know. I mean, we covered her costs with it. She came over, it was all paid for. Um, and she basically concluded, as I said before, that there was two spirits in the house, one female and one male. She said both of them were definitely human spirits, but one of them was what she would regard as in league with the demonic because of the type of things that he was involved in his lifetime, and that negative energy was still trapped in the building, or he was somehow. So there was prayers said, and there was that sense of a relief, but there was a lot of people in the house, you know, so it felt very safe. Um, I do remember, I think the following evening, we all went for dinner in the Belfast Castle, which at the time used to serve nice food. And it was very atmospheric, and it was, you know, around this time of the year. And she loved all that. She loved all the old buildings and all the architecture. And she was telling us about other hauntings that she'd worked on as well. And one of them was, which it's sort of now known as the haunting in Connecticut. There's a film made about it. And she would have told us things that she experienced in other properties. And she told us about how she felt when she was at the Amityville house. She told us about quite a long investigation that they did in the Haunting in Connecticut house. And one of the things that really stood out to me, and it kind of creeps me out to this day, is that she said when her and Ed were there in that house, they captured orbs on camera floating around the house. And on one occasion, it was either her or Ed, I can't remember which, but they literally saw a head develop within the orb and float down a corridor towards them. And that just, to me, is so creepy. Um, but these disembodied type, almost human-like figures can appear. And I suppose it's quite similar to the experience that I had in my own attic, where this body part kind of appeared. Um, and that always stood out to me. But she seemed very genuine and sincere and friendly. She liked a glass of Chardonnay. Tony liked a whiskey. But they kept that for after the investigation. And she stayed in touch, you know, so she always sent us a Christmas card and I would have sent her one back. And there was one year that my twin brother was over in America working for, I think he was working for Live Nation, which is like a big events company in New York. And he thought, I must call down and see Lorraine because she had that really nice maternal, caring attitude. And my
Yeah.
brother, I think, out of curiosity, just wanted to visit the house and the museum. So he
I,
called her.
I've been there. I've been there.
Yeah, you've been there. Yeah, I've
I've been.
never been. I've been to New York a few times and always thought I must call in there. But by the last time I was in New York, unfortunately, Lorraine had passed away and it just didn't work out. But that particular time when my brother was there, he called her landline and she said, I knew you were going to call,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which I thought was quite interesting. Also, interestingly, when Lorraine was here, the night before she arrived at the house, I had a dream. I had this dream that a phone was ringing and I picked it up and it was Ed Warren, and Ed Warren spoke to me on the phone through this dream.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to say it to Lorraine until I got to know her a bit better in case it
Yeah. Yeah.
upset her, but I told her at that dinner in the Belfast Castle. And she said, well, what did he say? And I said, well, Ed specifically told me he talked about the lecture and he says, I don't like Lorraine doing these lectures on her own. And he says, kid, you're in charge. He says, don't mess it up. And and she goes, that is so Ed. She goes, she says he would have called you kid. He would have said, don't mess it up. He would have been like quite ballsy like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, she also told me about another experience where they'd just come back from a haunting investigation and Ed and her had gone to bed. And I think she had an Alsatian dog or something like that. And the dog was picking up the energy of this thing that had followed them home into their bedroom. And basically she said something like can't remember exactly what happened, but all hell broke loose in her house. I'm not sure if that was depicted in in one of the films or not. But she discussed that night about how it followed them home, and they made that decision to try and back down from going to these hauntings. And she said people didn't believe us about these things, but again, they happen when you least expect it. But what they didn't want is it following them into their homes. So they had the house blessed quite a lot, and they kept objects in the museum. And I think Ed, being sick when he first got in touch with us, wanted to help us, but with him being sick, he didn't want Lorraine coming to Ireland on her own. But being the person that she was, she came over. I think she was in her early 80s, and
Wow.
she just bonded with us, and she wanted to do something, even though she'd retired from investigations. So she was lovely.
So you brought her out of retirement for one last job.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, she
yeah.
obviously must have, I'm sure she's clairvoyant, and she obviously you you and your brother and and your family and the actual house itself resonated with her enough to come over in her 80s. So that, I mean, and obviously getting that message from Ed is extremely powerful. I believe that was absolutely real, and that was Ed just sort of looking out for his partner basically. So Lorraine's gone back to Connecticut. You obviously left with a lot of unanswered questions, but also a lot more belief that what you're dealing with as a family is real. Talk me through what happens next with your own research, and particularly who is this demonic entity in the house?
Well, Lorraine described this person as in league with the demonic. So what I had discovered, and I actually discovered this before Lorraine came to the house, was I studied law at Queen's, and in my final year, I was doing criminology, and you had to write a piece of coursework on you had like different subjects to pick from, and I picked corruption within the police force in Northern Ireland. And around that time, actually,
And you're still
before
alive.
Lorraine had,
I'm joking.
huh?
And you're still alive. Sorry,
Exactly.
carry on, carry on.
Yeah. So I was writing this coursework, and this name was appearing in the books. A man called Sir Richard Dawson Bates. He was the Minister of Home Affairs for Northern Ireland. He was responsible for setting up the B Specials, which was basically like a voluntary police force that was virtually all Protestant and unpaid, and they were accused of murders and corruption. And basically, he was in charge of that body within the police. He didn't trust the mainstream police force at the time, which was the RIC, and he established this um, unionist version of which largely made up of paramilitaries. And so I was writing about him. And at this stage, there was a lot happening in the house, but also there was a property boom happening in Northern Ireland. And my mum was like, you know what? I've had enough. I'm going to sell this house. I want to get rid of it. We love the house. It's beautiful. But, if we have an opportunity to go, we should maybe go when the going's good. So the house was actually sale agreed, and I received the deeds. I actually kept one of the deeds for you to look at because we own the house outright and we
Oh
have the
wow.
deeds.
Oh wow.
So I wanted to show you this one and talk to you about it. So this particular deed I was looking at because the house was going through the whole conveyancing process, and it had all been done and dusted, and we got the deeds in our hands. And as I was researching the deeds, in 1922, Sir Richard Dawson Bates purchased our family home. And that just sent shivers up my spine because I was literally writing about him in my coursework about how corrupt he was and the things that he was involved in and how openly sectarian he was.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my goodness. Um, so I started obviously going into depth researching about him. And in 1922, just shortly after he purchased the house at a very discounted price from the previous resident the year before, um, there was a famous murder case just within a mile of our house called the McMahon family murder. And that Catholic family were sort of up and coming business people. Well, they were fairly established. They were living in this very middle class area, and they were seen as a threat, or they were seen as Irish nationalists in around the period of partition. So it is well known now that a group of B specials went in and murdered the whole family. Bearing in mind, Dawson Bates had just moved into the area, and I think he, I don't know if he was involved in it or not, but certainly he never was convicted of anything. But it's highly suspicious about his involvement. He also was involved in gun smuggling, selling of guns for profit. Um, you know, he was a fairly corrupt person. He didn't like Catholics working in Stormont. He campaigned to have the Irish language banned. He was very openly sectarian. And when he died, according to the deeds that we have, the estate passed the house over to the WAC Evangelical Crusade. So, to our knowledge, it was almost like an attempt by his estate to keep Catholics out of the house because it was like a Protestant denomination of Christianity. But the house then sort of became a manse house up until the point where my parents bought it, and we may have been the first Catholics to have ever lived there, which might have possibly angered this spirit in some way. Um, but Northern Ireland, it's like, we're still trying to shake off the ghost of sectarianism and hatred. And I think he was like this symbol that is still idolized by some people within the community. And it's almost like a possession in itself, shaking off that horrible, oppressive sectarianism.
Yeah.
But then we also discovered that another lady lived in the house and apparently died there. And her name was Elizabeth Bigger. She died a spinster, and her father was quite wealthy and had come from the area. They lived in actually a manor house in the area, and I think she actually rented our house off the owner, but she lived there and it was seen as her home. But she was known as a socialite and a party girl and someone who had lots of life about her, but never married and never had children. So we do believe that her spirit, it could be her that's in the house. Only recently, in recent years, we did track down the grave and I found it. It's a big, big, beautiful grave, and she's buried with her father, Joseph Bigger, and her brother, Joseph Bigger. And it is a beautiful big grave, but it's all become very dilapidated. But I brought up some white lilies and put them on her grave just as a sign of respect. And it was quite strange because that day, all of a sudden after that, all these great things started, like there was like all this good luck coming into my life, and I thought, oh my God, maybe that's something to do with Miss Bigger looking out for me, which I thought was a really nice thought, but God knows,
Yeah,
So yeah.
It's so what's happened? What give us an update now then? So what's is your mum in the house still? Is she still experiencing it? Is she just living with it now? Does she feel safe? Give us an update on now.
So after Lorraine and more recently, the house has been pretty quiet. There was a few things that happened, but they were quite mild. One of the things that the spirit used to do in the house was mimic people that lived in the house. So it would, like, we used to think it was pretending to be one of us. Like, for instance, I would be in bed in the attic when I used to sleep there. Luckily not anymore. But you would hear like the sound of the front door opening up.
Yeah.
And then it would sound like high heels walking into the hall, a bag being set down, and keys. You would hear keys. So I would assume that was my mother coming home from a night out or something like that. But one particular night, the footsteps continued to come up, right up the stairs, right up into the attic and into the middle of the room, which was really quite strange because my mother would have never come into my bedroom in the middle of the night and for no reason. And when I looked, there was no one there. When I looked down the stairs, there was no one there, but I could hear it plain as day. And then 10, 20 minutes later, my mum did actually genuinely arrive home. So things like that would happen. So more recently, if in fact in October of this year, my brother was in the house and he heard what he thought was me coming into the house. He was in the house on his own. He was upstairs, and whoever it was shouted up the stairs, "Hello," and he thought that it was me because it sounded like me, but I was still in work. So thought nothing of it, thought, well, these things happen in our house and maybe it was coming from outside. The very next morning, I was in my own house, which is built in the grounds of the property, and I woke up at my usual time, was just getting out of bed, and I heard someone say, "Nathan," calling my name. And I assumed that somehow my brother had let himself into my house, and which, I don't really want people just letting themselves into my house, but I thought, that's weird. Why would someone do that? But they were calling from outside my bedroom. And I opened the door and there was no one there. But to me, it sounded like my brother,
Yeah.
my twin brother. And the day before, he had heard me shouting hello up the stairs. So something strange is currently happening. Nothing else has happened since then, but that is a little bit odd that these things are happening again.
Yeah, mimicking is I've experienced that with. I used to hear my eldest daughter like uncontrollably sobbing from the next room, and I would shout, "Are you okay?" And then she would say, "Yeah, I'm fine." And she'd be in a totally different area of the house. It was, but it was
Wow.
definitely my daughter crying. It was for me at the time. I do believe I was oppressed by something.
Yeah.
Not to get too sensational, but something was trying to stop me from making the film. It was a 6-year ordeal. It was a challenging film to make, and I do believe I was being oppressed by something, not necessarily demonic, but I do feel I was being it was sort of trying to steer me off the path of making
Yeah.
a film. And
And that's something that Lorraine Warren would have spoken about. She says that this spirit will try to oppress you. It's trying to separate your family even further. It's trying to encourage you to take alcohol.
yeah,
It's trying to encourage negative things to happen in your life, and you have to stay positive.
yeah,
So I do believe that those things can oppress you, and
yeah,
certain spaces and energies can make you feel that way.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's when you know you're on the right path. When you are afflicted and oppressed by things that are out of your control like that. For me, I don't get fearful of it. I just get more confidence by what I'm doing, because if I am being oppressed by something, then I know that I'm on the right path. And that's taking maturity and experience to get to that stage in my life. But no, everything you've encountered and your family have encountered, I truly believe is and was authentic. I mean, I would say, like, if it's quiet at the house at the moment, then yeah, leave it be. But it'd be interesting to see where this Ouija board is. If someone's out there and you're listening and you reckon you've got the Ouija board, reach out to me.
And
But
I would recognize it because we specifically left two letters off the board so that in some weird psychological way we didn't think it would work. So it's one of those odd Ouija boards that doesn't have all the letters of the alphabet on it,
oh, there you go.
but
Yeah,
it still worked.
absolutely. Yeah. I can hear the audience's comments now going, "You shouldn't have brought a Ouija board into the house." But it's one of those things where, I mean, everything happens for a reason, and I do think it intensified the activity in the house, and it brought there's a lot of unresolved. To be honest, in the country that we both live in, there's a lot of unresolved trauma there, generational trauma, a lot of hatred. Obviously, where we are specifically, it was in the form of religion. The
Yeah.
amount of hatred, and I do feel that will die off with the generation of people. Unfortunately, unfortunately, there's a lot of young people coming through now that haven't been affected by sectarianism, and I don't want to get too far down the road with this with regards to. I love the country that I live in. I love Belfast, but it still has a lot of unresolved trauma. Which
Oh,
goes,
definitely. I mean, in my day job, Marty, I work full time helping victims of the Troubles as a tribunal representative and welfare officer. So I help people with compensation for horrible things that have happened to them. And we help people from both sides of the community. And it actually really brings me great joy to be able to change people's lives in a tangible way. Even if it is monetary, I'm bringing them justice as well, but also bringing them acknowledgement and resolution to horrible things that have happened to them. And Northern Ireland is such a unique place, and so many horrible, horrible things happened indiscriminately to people that should never have happened. And there's a lot of that energy trapped here, definitely. And unfortunately, I think one of the residents of my home was a contributor to that.
No wonder Richard
Um,
Dawson Bates doesn't want you in that house, mate. All this good work you're
It's
doing.
true, but I'm doing my best to bring a bit of positive energy in. I'll give you a funny story too. So I mentioned that I did a bit of acting. So around the time, I think it was after Lorraine had been at the house, I got cast in a television commercial, and it was filming up in the North Coast, and they were putting me up in accommodation called the Macro Boy House. I don't know if you've heard of it.
That rings a bell, yeah.
The Macro Boy House Hotel. And when I Googled the directions to the Macroboy house, because I'd never been there in my life, it came up that it was the former home of Sir Richard Dawson
Oh my
Bates.
God. You can't get away from this guy, man. Oh my
So
God.
I specifically requested a room in the new part of the hotel, and
Yeah,
thankfully nothing happened.
not the attic.
No, no. But I did tell the receptionist that I have something in common with the hotel, and I said that the previous owners have lived in both houses. I'm not sure at what stage he owned that, but he may have had that as his country house and this as a house closer to Stormont in the city. But it was quite strange.
Well, whether you like this or not, Richard Dawson Bates is a huge part of your journey as well. You know, I mean, it's he hasn't come on your radar for nothing. You know what I mean? So whether it's you to deal with this unresolved trauma, I believe a lot of spirits that are trapped in houses. I call them vessels, but the house is the vessel. It's got a lot of trapped energy, and sometimes paranormal encounters and spirits and entities come forward because they want to deal with this unresolved issues from their past. And maybe you are the person to help Richard get to that sort of don't know how would we describe it, get to some sort of conclusion and get to some sort of like release from maybe the hatred and the evil that he still has inside. I don't know, but I'm not an expert, but I do feel like you can't shake this guy, and he's not going to go away until maybe you have to face something within that house or within, I don't know what the answer is, but yeah, he's definitely part of your journey somehow.
Yeah, I think the story is still to be continued on that front. It's not like a Hollywood movie that's perfectly tied up and we
No.
have a conclusion, because we'll never know who's really there or what it really was. But I mean, all we can really do is look at the past and see how can we unlock that? How can we make sense of it?
Yeah.
And it sort of fits the narrative, being from Northern Ireland and the sorts of people that have lived there and the feelings that they've had. But God only knows who really was haunting the house. I mean, maybe it was all in our minds.
That's a good time to close then. So, but thanks, Nathan, for coming on. We'll put a few links in the description below, a few articles that have been released surrounding the house. If you ever want to, I don't want to jinx this now, but if the activity does intensify and you want another objective mind on it, give me a call and we'll the team and I will come over and we'll have a little look around. We'll be putting barbecues over spots, but we'll be have a little look around and get a feeling of the place and see if we can help you. But only if the activity intensifies.
Yeah, let's just let us get through Christmas first, and then
I noticed it's like 29th of November and you've got a tree behind you. That's pretty.
Yeah, I put it up with the weekend. I love
Are you a
Christmas.
Christmas man? Yeah. Are you?
I love Christmas. I also love Halloween too, but I just like this time of the year. It's, and the tree is just a bit of light in the dark, and that's what I'm all about. So, yes, you'd be very welcome to come to the house and even just to have a look around, to see if you pick up any vibes. But thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. Thanks, mate.
Thanks for listening to our podcast, and remember about our Facebook page where you can find out more information about our documentary. If you have some spare cash, then please buy us a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com/HTTD podcast to help us keep this podcast going. And it would only be right to finish with the main man himself.
You have two angels. You've got your guardian angel assigned to you when you conceived. When you're just a zygote, clinging to the endometrial wall of your mother, the moment you're conceived until you get to heaven or wherever you're going to go. And you also have a birthday angel assigned to you on your birthday. And that angel has only one preoccupation, your destiny. Because everybody has a destiny in relation to God and his or her fellow creatures. Now, they will do the essential, the two angels. But unless you cultivate them, they won't do more than that. And if you don't cultivate them, then you're going to lose, because they will not give you special help, and they won't teach you to listen to them, and you won't recognize their voice. Angels, first of all, haven't got bodies, and angels certainly don't come down on earth in trials, and they don't sort of try to rebel or try to change the will of God, or are sorrowful because something happens to somebody, God does something to somebody. I think this cultivation of angels in the TV series is a corruption, a satanic hoax. I think it deliberately deceives people as to the function of angels. And therefore it's very easy to believe in nice angels that come and save you from a car accident, or from a breech birth of a baby, or from a cancer operation. That's not the essence of angels at all. It's a different thing completely. But you've got to find out that by cultivating angels. Most people don't. But those who do find out they can talk to angels. And they find out directions from angels. And they're preserved by angels. An angel can help you to get rid of your smoking habit, to get rid of your drinking habit, to get rid of your masturbation habit, to get rid of your drug habit. They can do anything you ask them if you want to. They need your cooperation. And you can always rely on them. And then you will know when they're warning you. But if you're not cultivating them, you won't see the warning signs. They can console you when you lose your little dog, when you lose your favorite son, or your favorite man, or your favorite husband, your favorite wife. They can console you. But you must ask them to do so, and you must submit to their consolation. There is this rule, submission. It's humbling. You literally ask a non-physical being whom you believe in faith exists for your good and for your attention. You literally are going to turn to them and rely on them. The moment you do that, the angel locks into you, because then he's got a humble being.